Unwanted, Chapter 43. Not Trained, September 1984. September brought another monsoon season. For over 2 weeks, the sky was obscured behind a layer of dark clouds. The wind bellowed, whipping violently against the coconut trees. All I could see from the window of my classroom each day was an endless sheet of water falling over the flooded city. On wet days, my mother found it difficult to sell soup at the market. Even if she managed to cover her pots, the customers could not enjoy their meals as the wind tore through the muddy streets, driving bullets of rain into them. The moisture saturated her clothes, and the cheap dyes that tinted her outfit washed down her body in a dense black flood. Many days she brought home a full pot of soup. Behind her, my sister chased bubbles across the wet ground, clutching her soggy pillow. As my mother's meager assets melted away, we could see signs of a devastating end. One afternoon, after the last period of class, I left the writing club in a hurry, holding a broken umbrella over my head. Outside, behind the school's large iron gate, Kim huddled inside an oversized yellow raincoat that covered half her face. As I pushed through the gate to join her, dead leaves scattered on the brick path. "Ah, Kian, I found you," she said, looking directly at me. I was surprised to see her outside my school. In the months since I had returned from my incarceration, I only saw her secretly as we met at night, either under the magnolia tree near my house or in the rice field behind her family's kitchen. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She took a step closer. Her eyelashes, long and thick, fluttered like butterfly wings. I could see her round pupils open up like doors, beckoning me to gaze deeply into her eyes. Everything about Kim seemed so fragile, my instinct was to reach out and protect her. Yet I could never forget everything her family represented. Conflicted, I stood statue-like in the downpour. "It's about your grandfather," she said. "I just saw him in town attending the People's Court. Today, the Communist Party is holding trials to eliminate the, quote, negative phenomena within the city government. Your grandfather was in the crowd watching as I was leaving. There are so many people, I am a little worried for his safety." She lowered her voice and went on. "Why do you ask if something is wrong?" "I was shocked to see you here, that's all." "Why would I need a reason to see you?" Her last sentence caressed me like a warm touch. I forgot myself and the incessant rain. All that mattered to me was the slender girl with velvet eyes and the way she was looking at me. "Shall we go?" she asked. "Go? Where to?" She smiled. "To find your grandfather, silly." I nodded dumbly and reached for her hand, leading her through streets overhung with the thick branches of oak trees. Her fingers rubbed tenderly against my palm. The combination of Kim's touch and the anxiety of walking with her on Nha Trang's largest avenues in broad daylight sent a shot of electricity through me that nearly made me swoon. We walked through the main market. Kim took me to the square where she had spotted my grandfather. The open piazza, where the 6 major boulevards of the city converged, was blocked with police barriers and teeming with curious spectators. Police officers in brown uniforms were everywhere. Despite the rain, hundreds of people thronged the street, ready for the demonstration that the communist government had announced in the last few days. The spectacle had not yet begun, yet the crowd was shrill with anticipation. Across the square, I saw my grandfather standing under a lamppost. His hand rested on his walking stick. He was soaking wet from the rain, but he paid no mind to the weather. His eyes were fixed, and I could tell he was deep in thought. I pulled at Kim's hand. "I see him," I said. "How do we get to the other side?" "Come with me," she yelled over the noise. It took us 20 minutes to push through the mob to get to a policeman. From a distance, I could hear the marching footsteps. Kim tapped on the officer's shoulder to get his attention. He turned around and looked at her, his eyes bloodshot from the sting of the rain. "We would like to cross the street," Kim said to him. "Can you let us through?" The policeman raised his hand to stop her. "Wait a minute, the prisoners are coming." As if to emphasize his statement, at the turn of the street, the band appeared, led by a troop of police. Their banners flapped in the wind, proclaiming slogans like "Rectification Campaign Against the Guilty Members from Within the Communist Party" and "Erroneous Thinking and Non-Socialist Behavior Among the Traitors Deserve a Severe Punishment from the People's Court," in trails of dark ink scribbled across white fabrics. The deputy commander of the police sat atop a moving jeep, reciting communist rhetoric into a loudspeaker. After each motto, he paused to allow time for the crowd to cheer. The prisoners, at least 30 of them, staggered in 2 rows, their heads bent downward, their hands tied behind their backs. Conical paper hats, the kind worn by the fool in Japanese operas, identified them with derogatory labels: betrayers, reactionaries, and anti-socialists. As the condemned passed through the crowd, people on both sides pelted them with rotten fruits, bricks, and stones, while at the same time chanting phrases like "Long live the Communist Party" and "Beware of the sinister schemes of the Chinese expansionists and the U.S. imperialists." Angry fists pounded the air, and hoarse voices demanded justice. From across the street, I saw my grandfather. He stepped forward clumsily, dropping his walking stick on the ground. His hands reached out, shaking. Following his stare, I looked among the prisoners and saw a beloved face. It was Luan. As soon as she recognized my grandfather, Luan halted. Her knees wobbled and she fell to the wet pavement. The foolish hat dropped from her thick river of hair and was lost under the feet of the crowd. I saw that a rope was wrapped around her neck, making an X across her chest to dig at her hands, which were bent tortuously behind her back. In her bare feet, she appeared diminutive, almost like a little girl. My grandfather limped over to Luan. He touched her shoulders, pressed her face against his waist, and stroked her hair. His mouth moved, but I could not hear his words above the street noise. At a corner of the street, a policeman noticed the affectionate display. He strode in between them, using his rifle to shove my grandfather back. The officer's strength and aggressiveness knocked both Luan and my grandfather to the ground. He fell backward, landing hard on his hip. "Grandpa!" I screamed out. My grandfather didn't hear me. I dropped the torn umbrella, pushed aside the policeman who was holding Kim and me in place, and plunged into the crowd. My grandfather hoisted himself on his elbows and looked around, disoriented. I helped him up, brushing the filth from his clothes. Suddenly, Kim was beside me. The officer who had hit my grandfather stood a few steps away, blocking Luan from our view. I recognized him as one of Mr. Kiba's personal guards. "Grandpa, are you okay?" I asked him. "I am fine," my grandfather replied. "Get me to Luan. I want to say goodbye." The officer held up a hand to us warningly. "It is forbidden to show affection to the criminals. I advise you two to get out of here and take the old man with you." Someone yelled a taunting comment to the prisoners, and the policeman turned to investigate. I straightened up and said to Kim, "Please stay here with my grandfather. I will say goodbye to Luan for him." While the policeman was distracted, I rushed to Luan. Kneeling beside her, I noticed Mr. Trent for the first time. On the front of his chest hung a big cardboard sign that said, "I was once a member of the cadre, But I dishonored the party and betrayed my own country. I am now beyond redemption." He seemed to recognize me, and a rush of shame washed over his face. His upper lip was swollen and curled upward, revealing the black gap where his long, repulsive incisors used to be. Quickly, he looked away. Luan remained on her knees on the ground. Her rain-soaked hair fell over her face, and a few strands caught in her mouth. Remnants of egg yolk and tomato seeds adorned her clothes. My head felt dizzy as if I was in a nightmare. The noise of the angry crowd faded away. I reached out and touched her cheeks. Luan buried her face in my hands and cried, her shoulders shaking. Suddenly, I could feel her tongue dart out of her mouth, soft and wet, brushing against my skin, as she expelled something into my palms. Then she lifted her head and looked at me intently. In my open hands, a gold necklace and a piece of green jade, the size of an old Chinese coin, sparkled against the gray afternoon. I closed my fingers instinctively. "Put it away, Kian," she said. "Your grandmother gave it to me when I first moved in with your family. Tell your mother I am returning it to her." A blow exploded against my back, knocking me forward. I looked up to see the police officer looming above me, his eyes wide with rage. "Get away from the criminals," he screamed, whacking me again with his rifle. "No!" Kim cried out. She left my grandfather on the pavement and ran to seize the officer's arm. The moment he saw her, his anger changed to fear. "I am sorry, Miss Kim," he stammered. "I didn't recognize you." Kim took my hand. "We're leaving right now. We don't mean any trouble." We rejoined my grandfather as quickly as possible. The three of us disappeared into the crowd. Night fell over the square and the rain stopped. Outside Tantan Theater, a large stage strung with colored lights faced the large piazza. A wooden bar on the left served as the defendant's stand. At the center of the platform, 3 male judges sat on a bench looking down at the front row where the prisoners were assembled. Since it was a people's court, there would be no need for jurors or lawyers. Furthermore, the defendants weren't allowed to speak at any point during the trial. The people's representatives had already predetermined their guilt. It was now time for the officials to announce the verdicts. We stood in the dark watching the proceedings from behind hundreds of bobbing heads. People moved in and out of their rows, talking loudly to each other, fighting for better seats. Snacks passed from hand to hand, as though everyone were watching a performance. I stood transfixed, gazing at Luan among the prisoners. She sat with her head bent and her shoulders hunched, hiding her face between her knees. Her arms were tied behind her back, and it hurt my eyes to look at her. When it was time for the trial to begin, a policeman on the stage fired his gun 3 times. The shots echoed through the square, and the crowd hushed. One of the judges stood in front of the microphone, holding a sheet of paper. Everything became a blur to me until I heard Luan's name called out. 2 policemen pulled her, kicking and screaming, to the stand. One of the policemen shoved a rag in her mouth to quiet her. A judge denounced Luan and her husband for their degenerate conduct, which he called a demonstration of an extremely dangerous kind of peasant communism, subjectivism, rollback of socialism, and Maoism. They had betrayed the country, joined hands with the reactionaries. They insulted the honor of the Communist Party, and for that, he said they must be punished. Luan was sentenced to 15 years, hard labor, with no chance of parole. Her husband's punishment was life imprisonment. After the ceremony, both of them were shoved down the stairs and driven away.